Okay, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. My name is Victor, and I'm going to be your anchor for this training. Okay, so this is the Cisco Cybersecurity Essentials. We have 5 modules. In the first module, we've looked at some of the foundations, some of the basics in terms of personal data, in terms of confidentiality, integrity, availability, non-repudiation, authenticity, or authentication. Those are the 5 important elements of information security. So when you're trying to protect your IT infrastructure, those are the 5 things you should be looking at. How do you implement them in whatever kind of controls you intend to do that? Okay, in this particular chapter, we're going to be looking at attacks, concepts, and techniques. So if you like this video, make sure you subscribe, make sure you like, make sure you share, and make a comment in the comment section if you have questions, or you comment in the group, either the WhatsApp or Telegram group used for this particular training. Okay. Now, we have quite some sections here. We want to look at how do you analyze a cyber attack. Want to see the characteristics and operations of a cyber attack. What's vulnerability and how can it be exploited? What are the different examples of security vulnerabilities? What is malware and what are the different types of malwares? Malware is the umbrella word for anything that causes system malfunction. So we want to look at methods of infiltration and denial of service, DOS. So we have denial of service, we have distributed denial of service. So in cybersecurity, when you hear the word denial of service, you are trying to say IT systems, websites, cloud servers, networks, your printer, your mobile apps, all of the things that normally you should have access to. So denial of service has to do with availability. Once you cannot have access to it again, then you'd have denial of service. And when you say distributed denial of service, you're trying to say that so many attack vectors are responsible for that denial of service. So if by one action, I cause you not to be able to use your camera, for instance, that's denial of service. So if by 5, 6, 7, 8 actions, I'm able to make you not use the service, then you say it is a distributed denial of service because it's happening from kind of different angles. So we'll also look at the cybersecurity landscape. We want to look at trends in the cyber threat landscape. We want to look at what is a blended attack and how do you reduce the impact of a cybersecurity incident. Let's analyze a cyber attack. Now let's look at vulnerabilities. Now there are a few words that you want to be very conversant with: exploit, attack, vulnerability. So when you use the word exploit, you're trying to say, one, there's a vulnerability. And if I even go on, we normally say you have a hack equation. So before a hack can happen, it then means that there is a motive, there is a vulnerability, and there's a methodology. So these 3 things must be present before you have a hack. So there must be first a motive, there must be a goal, there must be a value that a hacker wants to derive, then there must be a vulnerability. So one of the job, or the most important job a security analyst is going to do day to day, is to just look out for vulnerabilities. If you're a web security analyst, you're going to be looking out for web security flaws and vulnerabilities. That's what you're going to be looking out for. If you're a network security analyst, within your network, within your enterprise, all you're going to be looking out for is how do you scan, how do you check up for vulnerabilities you have in your network. If you're cloud, if you're mobile, if whatever aspect of security that you tend to go into or you are into, all you're going to be looking out for is vulnerabilities, for flaws, for loopholes. And when you say exploit, you're trying to say any application, script, program that is going to take advantage of that vulnerability. So you cannot have a hack without like I said, a motive, a vulnerability, and of course a method. That's why if you want to hack a system, one of the things you want to look out for is vulnerability. What is the vulnerability? And most of the times, how to compromise most of these vulnerabilities is kind of open book, is an open knowledge. So the first thing you want to do is to first check for the vulnerability. For instance, the vulnerability you have in Windows 11 is different from the vulnerability you have in Windows 10, completely different from the vulnerability you have in Windows 7, like that. So to hack a system, first, you have to check out for the vulnerability. So it's the vulnerabilities that now determine the methodology. For instance, if you have a house, it's only if the access door is bad that you can get into the house through that bad access door. If that is very fortified, if it's security and iron steel door, then that place is not vulnerable. So you're going to start looking at the ceiling, the roof. So if the roof is kind of like a slab, then it's going to be a little bit difficult. Then people start looking at, okay, the windows, how fortified is the window? So if that is not also vulnerable, start looking at the walls. Can we open up the wall? Can we pour maybe a kind of a chemical or whatever to have access to the building or whatever? So some people can still go ahead and still do some barricades around the walls of the building. So to be able to get into have access to a particular system, first thing first is vulnerability assessment. That's why you have spy agents. That's why you have you do open source intelligence gathering. So when we look at the digital forensic course, I'm going to lay some basic foundation with respect to vulnerability assessment. Then, of course, an attack is an act of using an exploit against a vulnerability. Then, of course, you have software, you have hardware vulnerabilities. So you can have error in OS. Okay, you can have a sync flog, a knock, you can have project zero. So it can either be a software or a hardware vulnerability. So you have, if you need to categorize security vulnerabilities, so you can categorize them as buffer overflow, non-validated inputs. I'll explain them: risk conditions, weakness in security practices, access control problems. So for the first one, which is buffer overflow, here you're trying to say, normally, for instance, if you have, for every application that you run, for every software that you run within your system, they all have their memory limits. They have how much RAM you need, how much processor you need, how much whatever. So once data is written beyond that buffer, beyond what that particular application and that particular system can take, or that resource can take, or what has been designated for it, so you can have a buffer flow of attack. So what happens is that a lot of scripts and applications, what they do is to target or to give kind of packets of data far more than what a particular system or a particular resource can take. So once that happens, the system becomes kind of unintelligent to actually to query or to interact with data and make proper decisions. That is when you can now have an attack. You also have non-validated inputs. So when you don't validate the inputs that a system is kind of receiving, so it can lead to vulnerability. You are filling a website form, for instance. You have username, you have password, you have email, you have date of birth, you have upload a file, let's say your CV and whatever. For each of those kind of inputs, you want to make sure that you are validating, you are making sure people enter the right type of data, the right size of data, and all of the different kind of data formats. Let's say you didn't validate the size of the CV for that form. What's going to happen? It then means people can upload 10 gig file. They can upload a movie. What about the file type? This is also synonymous to what we call upload bombing. When people put in much data than a particular system can actually take care of. So imagine you have just 3 gig size of website hosting space, and you do not validate those inputs, what's going to happen? You are going to receive inputs from just 3, 4, 5 persons, which is an attack, and you're not able to attend to other persons that need to fill that form. Of course, so you have risk conditions, weakness in security practices, access control problems. So if you have any questions with these items that are very self-explanatory, please do a comment in the comment section and I'm going to reply you. Okay, so you have malware. So malware is the umbrella word for anything that causes harm, system malfunction. Most of the times it's script or it's software. There are different types. So depending on their purpose, it can be spyware. You have something that is going to be, that's why you see people covering their cameras within their system. Is so that, because the primary purpose of a spyware is to track or to spy. It can be your GPS location, it can be your facials, it can be whatever. Then for an adware, most of the times to deliver advertisement. I keep using this example of the Raila Odinga malware that was very popular. So it's just like a campaign. It pops out every 5 minutes, 2 minutes on your browser, vote Raila Odinga. And you have several kind of adware that in their own sense, they might not be harmful. But for the fact that they distract you, you're not able to concentrate and work on your PC, it then means that they are kind of, they are compromising our system. And of course, you have a bot. Bot is from the word robot, performs actions automatedly. You have ransomware, you have scareware. So very straightforward. You have rootkit, you have virus, Trojan, worms, man in the middle. Now, when you hear man in the middle attack or man in the mobile attack, is when you have two A, B, right? Communication between A and B. So once somebody is within, trying to sniff, trying to take control of the communication between A and B, you refer to that as a man in the middle attack. One way for you to be able to understand the differences between all of these types of malware is to have a table, and you first define all of these types of malwares, and you draw their operations, how they operate, how they spread, and maybe one examples. Once you're able to have a table that has those 4 items, you're able to differentiate between all of the different types of malware. Symptoms of a malware. Yeah, so very ugly picture here to depict, but that's what you call a malware, right? Worms, Trojans. So you just have several kind of things that are harmful within your system. So what do you call symptoms of a malware or indicators of compromise? When you have increased CPU usage, central processing unit usage, one way you can do that is by using some sysinternals tool. In the digital forensic course in the labs, we want to look at different type of tools that we can use to check out for background happenings within our system, for background communications. We could see where the communication is within our system, where it's going to, the port number, the IP address, and maybe whichever website it's trying to get to. When you have backdoors in your system, that's one way you're able to tell, why do I have increased CPU usage? Why do I have communications from this point to the other point? Right? I didn't initiate it. So where is it going to? You can pick up the IP address. You could do further forensic on it. I'm able to tell where this particular IP address is heading to. If you have decreased computer speed, or you have frequent freezes and crashes, all of these things you have mentioned here are likelihood that you have an attack or are indicators of a compromise. Okay, social engineering. So social engineering is when persons are manipulated to perform actions that actually they ordinarily wouldn't want to do. The goal most of the times is to divulge confidential information. Now, if I make you to give me your credit card details, if I make you to give me your bank details, if I make you to reveal information that ordinarily you wouldn't release, by trying to exploit your willingness to help, your willingness to solve problems, that's what you refer to as social engineering. So there are several ways social engineering can be done. It can be pretexting, it can be tailgating, it can be quid pro quo, right? Something for something. When you give somebody something and say, okay, if you do this, I'm going to give you this for exchange of something. So a lot of insider attacks happens that way, where an employee that has not been paid, for instance, for the last 6 months is being promised, let's say, a 3 years equivalent of allowances. That person will want to compromise, or we're going to make you so and so. That is quid pro quo, right? Something for something. An attacker requests personal information from a party in exchange for something. Or it can be your own personal data. It can be data for your enterprise. It can be data for your organization. Therefore, tailgating, if you are following an authorized person into a secure location. For instance, you can have a barricade, but because I'm following this other person that is authorized to have access to that place, then it's referred to as tailgating. It's a type of social engineering. Of course, pretexting, then you have phishing and several other types of social engineering methods. Password cracking. So in our hands-on lab, I'm going to give you one tool you could use to do password cracking. Very, very formidable. That's why you don't need people to have access to your system even for a second, right? Because social engineering is very key and can make your passwords to be vulnerable. Now, network sniffing, for instance, is going to be possible if somebody is using a sniffing tool like Wireshark. Brute force is when there is several possible attempts to get access to a system. So one way, a countermeasure for that is that, for instance, if you see for websites, what they do is that they put a captcha so that you have to put in a turning item or image before you get access. Or at times they might limit the login attempts. So if you log in, let's say 1, 2, 3 times, you are barred from attempting to the next 24 hours or 48 hours. Like my Amazon platform account, I think I was on mobile trying to have access to the Amazon partner program, tried to get a particular file, and I couldn't do that. I was logged out. After 3 attempts, I was logged out for like 24 hours and I had to just wait, right? So that way, the system is trying to make sure that the legitimate user is the person actually trying to have access to that platform. So phishing, so there are several types of phishing. You have spear phishing, you have vishing, that's voice, you have smishing, that's SMS, I think. You have, so for phishing, it's still a type of social engineering. You're trying to send something to somebody that looks like the real stuff, but it's not the real stuff. Severally, this can be implemented so easily. A network, a Wi-Fi SSID is cloned or a website is cloned, and it looks like the real stuff. You have access to it, and you're going to be sharing data that you wouldn't want to share if that you knew that it wasn't a legitimate site or application. Okay. Vulnerability exploitation. So the process is normally you gather information, which most of the times is reconnaissance. You determine, check out what you've learned, check out what the vulnerabilities are, then you can now use a known exploit to write a new exploit. So advanced persistent threat is where people have continuous access to a particular system, and most of the times it's very, very well funded, and you have to deploy a customized malware. So it's not something you're going to just use an open source tool to be able to deploy. Then you have WHOIS is a way to do reconnaissance and footprinting. Nmap is a tool you could use to scan a network. Okay, denial of service. So when there's an interruption of, it can be network, it can be website, it can be cloud, it can be whatever type of service. Once you have interruption, right, then you call it denial of service. Once it's coming from several vectors, then you call it distributed denial of service. You cannot access the internet, your computer is slow. But the thing there is, before you say you have denial of service, you must make sure that you don't have issue with your IT infrastructure. You're not saying your website is your website is slow when you have programming optimization issue, right? You don't say your computer is slow when you are running on low RAM and you say it's denial of service. No. So you have to differentiate between you having issues with your IT systems and when you have a cyber attack. So for distributed denial of service is when you have multiple coordinated sources trying to attack a system. So SEO poisoning. So for digital marketers, you are used to the word SEO, search engine optimization, where you're trying to improve the ranking of a website. Now, when this is done illegitimately, right? So you call it SEO poisoning. So what happens is that search engines don't actually, we will not be able to detect that this site is not actually ranking organically. Because what happens in SEO is that there are a whole list of items, things that you need to do for it to be able to rank on search engines. There's a digital marketing course on the channel, so you could check it up. If you're following the course up to this moment and you have not liked or you've not shared or you've not asked a question to be sure that you're following, please make sure you do that. And in the channel, there's also a digital marketing course I'm recording for students. That will give you good understanding of what SEO means. Most of the time, there are several items that needs to be implemented for a website to rank. So, but if somebody uses black hat techniques, right, things like keyword stuffing, so you have a lot of keywords being stuffed into the write-up, so it might confuse the search engine to rank that website better than others. Or for instance, somebody is using a tool, a traffic generator to generate a lot of traffic to a website. It can confuse search engines to be thinking this website have more traffic, whereas it's just a tool that is just pinging the IP address to count as actual human visitors. So these are the ways that SEO poisoning can be done. So the cybersecurity landscape, right? So what's a blended attack? Most of the times when several or multiple types of methodology is being used to implement an attack, you call it a blended attack. Okay, so you want to reduce impact. You want to reduce the effect of an attack, right? You have to communicate the issue. You have to be sincere. You want to be accountable. We have a situation whereby for one of our clients gets attacked, and one of the first things you have to do is to put up a notice. Let outside visitors not actually be aware that something bad is happening, and see how to gather their data, communicate to them. That way you're trying to reduce the impact of the attack. So you have a list of others here. Okay, so that's all for module 2. So we've looked at security vulnerabilities, how they're being exploited, some symptoms of malwares, and how you can reduce an impact. Thank you very much for listening. See you in module 3.